Welcome, everybody, to my boardroom. It is good to see you. You might be thinking, man, where is he at? Well, this is the actual spot where I do all my thinking, my learning, my time, where I'm working on my books, all of this stuff. So welcome to my boardroom. This is it. This is my long boardroom table, and I cleaned it up for you. I made it nice and tidy because usually it's littered with books and papers and whiteboards and different things. It's usually a complete disaster, and every now and again I will find a goldfish. Every now and again I will find a half-eaten sandwich from our 2-year-old, and that's it. So this is my office. My office is not located at my house. I actually don't work from my home. I actually work out of an office that's about 5 minutes from my house. So what I want to talk about today is a conversation I had with a guy who is he's been in the services industry for a really long period of time, and it was a real estate question that he had. And let me put this up here. And he had really, it was a really, really good real estate question, because he and his wife are getting to the point where they're closing in on 60 pretty fast. They have done very, very well for themselves and had purchased this piece of real estate, and they're kind of wondering what to do with it. And it's interesting because right now in many markets, the real estate has changed. And it's kind of interesting because even though my background right now is as a strategist, I don't do a lot of stuff related to real estate. But it still feeds my family, right? So let me get this up here real quick. Sorry, this was supposed to be done earlier, or actually it was done earlier, but it didn't take. Okay, there we go. We'll put that up there so you can at least see the scrolly thing. All right. So what had happened was they purchased this piece of real estate prior to COVID. And when they got through COVID, they were able to get this thing rented pretty well. And it's definitely rented under market. So the market value of this property, and it's in the Midwest, it's not located in the town that I'm at, is roughly, it's probably valued realistically somewhere in the mid to upper 400,000s. At least that's what other properties are listed for that are very similar in that same area. And they are really struggling with whether it makes sense to maintain the property, keep the property, or to sell. Well, the problem that they're getting is that the rents have not kept up with the amount of equity that's in the property. And that's a very typical problem that I'm seeing right now. So what am I talking about? Well, what I'm talking about is the amount of cash flow that they get based on the amount of equity, the return on equity that they have. So if the property is only generating an extra $200 a month in cash flow, but they have $100,000 of equity in the property. So mathematically, you take 200. We'll just do the math real quick together. That's $2,400 a year divided over the $100,000 worth of equity. That is a 2.4% return on equity. So when you start to think about it that way, and there's many, many properties that are like that right now. And I would even argue that if these netting $2,400 gross, or he's yielding $2,400 a month, or $2,400 annually gross net, it's more like 60% of that. So it'd even be worse than that when you're looking at it from that perspective. So does it mean that it's not worth doing? No. He and his bride still make substantial income. So the depreciation more than offsets it. There's definite tax benefits for holding on to it. And certainly there's a fair amount of appreciation that's still yet to go. But does it make sense for them to hold on to this property right now? Well, it was interesting because this question mathematically, many people who I talk to, they want the answer mathematically, where the question is very seldom mathematical, right? It's a very seldom is it a mathematic question, because there's a larger context with this. And generally it relates to, well, what do you want? What do you want for your life? Now they are in a spot where they really don't need the money, right? So for them, it's not about the monthly income. So, and clearly it's not, because it's probably easily under market by about $1,000 a month, easily. So could they raise the rents on the people that are there? Well, they don't necessarily want to do this because, just different. It's a situation that is not worth getting into right now. But for whatever reason, could they raise the rent? Could they get someone else out of there? Do they want to manage this on their own? Well, really, they don't. They don't want to raise the rents on these people, but they really don't want to hire a property manager, because there's in this particular market, it's hard to find property managers that are good. And it's just, there's a lot of components to this. There's so many uncertainties. I was thinking, well, what if we just sold it? So then they're like, well, why don't we just wait and sell it in the spring? To which I'm saying, well, what would be the point of waiting to sell this property in the spring? Well, that's when everybody lists their properties, right? Which is true, but not all properties are purchased in the spring. I can tell you, as an investor, I purchased most of my properties in November and December. Well, why is that? Because many people were significantly more motivated to sell their property, to be done with it, so they can go into the new year. And I was pretty happy to do that, because I could get a decent price for them. So I bought most of my investment properties, with very few exceptions, in the winter months. And that was important. So if this property is going to be sold as an investment type property, which is very typical for that particular area, for people to buy investment properties, there would have been no benefit to waiting by adding an additional 6 months of uncertainty into the equation by waiting until the spring, right? Because we don't know what the spring could look like. I mean, this tug of war that's going on in the market between the Fed and the president, and there is not a direct correlation between what the Fed does and what mortgage rates are. There is an indirect correlation, I will concede, but not a direct correlation, right? So if the Fed lowers the interest rates by a certain amount, it doesn't directly impact what mortgage rates do, right? There's an indirect correlation on HELOCs and prime rate loans and things like that, but there's not a direct correlation. It doesn't work that way. So the interesting thing about that is that once I pointed that out and said, well, there really is no benefit to waiting if you're going to try to sell this property to an investor, because the days on market are getting longer. And that's been a trend that has been going on for quite a while. In many markets, the trend of days on market getting longer is pretty much north, south, east, and west. So there is a softening in the market. And I wouldn't say that the market is in a recession or anything like that. I think that word would be a little harsh. But I would say that there is a significant slowing down. And is that projected to change anytime soon? I don't think it is. I don't think there's no reason to think that it would be, that it would change. But I will tell you this: properties that are priced well still sell, and they sell quickly. That is a very normal market. If you've been in real estate for any period of time, that's a very normal market where properties that are priced well will sell. So in other words, if this property if all of the other properties in that area that are very similar are being priced at, 460, 470, 480, and realistically they have, they've never really put any money into this property at all. It's all been pretty much infinite return for them. Then why in the world, why not just price it at, say, 440 and take your chips off the table? And, they're still going to have a nice little gain. And, they've already gotten tremendous amounts of cash flow from this property. What would be the difference? Leave a little bit of money on the table to get this thing sold quickly, rather than go through this long hoop jumping exercise of maybe trying to find a property manager to, get this property up to rental, up to market rent and things like that. So there was really no reason, right now they're in a transition because they're kind of in between tenants. They're not really sure what they want to do. There really is no reason to want to, to squeeze more juice out of this lemon, because there really is no reason to. So I'm being a little bit vague here on purpose in terms of the exact situation of the rent of the rental agreement. But basically, there's a couple people living there. One person has moved out, so it basically is now like, okay, do we try to find a third person? Do we put that on them, or really just do we take the chips off the table? Now, it was interesting because one other component to this conversation was in terms of taking their chips off the table with this piece of rental real estate was, well, what if we wanted to buy a property, say down in Myrtle Beach? What if we wanted to buy a property down in, say, St. Augustine, Florida, and we wanted to use that property down there? Let's say we bought it, there was $1 million property down there that we really wanted. Would that make sense to Airbnb that? Would that make sense to do that? And then we got into the conversation of Airbnb being this particular property. So here's the thing that I respect the people who do Airbnb and do it well, because they understand one thing really, really well, is that the Airbnb business isn't really the real estate business as much as it's the hospitality business. And I have said that for years, that trying to do this where you're going to be managing this property, you're basically running a front desk where you've got people coming in that want to live in your property, and when they show up at 2 a.m. or 3 a.m, and they can't get in for whatever reason, are you willing to take the call, or do you have infrastructure in place where someone else can take the call? Because if you don't have infrastructure in place where someone else takes the call, you're the one getting up, wiping the sleep out of your eyes and trying to figure out and navigate what they're doing wrong so they can get in the property. Or what if they get in the property and a raccoon got in there, or the place was unsecured, or any number of reasons why people might call. So it is the hospitality business first and foremost, with that is based around the real estate. It is not truly a real estate play. So to do something like that in St. Augustine, or to do something like that in South Florida, or in Myrtle Beach, that makes more sense, because there's a lot of property managers in those markets that manage those types of things. For them to do it in a Midwestern market where there really wasn't a lot of infrastructure, there's not a lot of other property managers that do that sort of thing well. Now you're asking them to do something that they're not really slated for. Now, I will tell you, there are some who just focus on just that. That's all they do is property management for Airbnbs, and they do really well. And they do really well with that. And to me, that was nothing that really interested me personally, because I had always looked at property management in a more traditional sense, where we would do longer term management of rental properties, and that made sense. So it was a really good conversation where we went back and forth a little bit, and I said, look, would it make sense for you to take those chips off the table and take that 100 and, say that they would net, say, 200,000 or 175,000. Let's say they netted 200,000, right? They would have a capital gain of, and the netting of 200,000 would be what their mortgage payoff would be. So let's say that they actually had, the capital gain would be about 75,000. So they'd be paying somewhere between 20 and 25% taxes, because you'd have the capital gains of 20% plus the depreciation recapture, which is taxed at 25%. So let's say somewhere in there that their effective tax rate would be 23%. Okay, fine. So they're paying 23% on 75,000, whatever that turns out to be. All right, so let's say it's $15,000, $20,000 worth of taxes. Now so they have this $200,000. Now it's down to 180. Now what they could do is avoid those taxes, or at least defer those taxes by doing a 1031 exchange. So if they were taking that as an investment, rolling that into another investment, if they were able to identify a new property to purchase within the 45-day parameter, they could do that and buy that property down in, say, Myrtle Beach. Okay, great. So now they're not having this tax consequence. Okay. Now we're talking. Now we're talking about getting that money. Now, here's the thing: when it comes to it's based on purchase price, not necessarily the net gain. So if it's if it's a $400,000 sale, it would be based on a $400,000 being rolled over into the next property. Okay, so I'm going to leave it there, because 1031 rules are not only, laws change from time to time, but that is a world that the nuances can get you really into trouble. So talk to a person that does 1031s that can get you really good advice on that. But long and short of it, let's say that they were able to roll $400,000 into, or whatever they were able to sell the property for. So let's say it's 400,000. They were able to roll that into the next property. That's great. But they were thinking like, well, yeah, but how do we know that we're going to sell this property for 400,000? Well, the reality is you don't. But if you don't really need the money, because realistically of where they're at, if they put that property on the market for say 430,000, and everybody else is listing their property for 470,000, and they're all very similar properties, whose property is likely going to get purchased? Again, they're going to get a lot more interest just simply because they're the outlier. And again, properties that are priced well will sell. That is true in all markets. And right now, money is still flowing. Money is still very loose. And that's a very different bird compared to what was going on like 2011, 2012, when money was extremely hard to come by. There was hardly any liquidity in the market. So would it make sense for them to leave that money on the table, that $20,000 or $30,000 on the table? Well, for them, it did make sense because they don't need that money, and the liquidity or the money that they could take to roll over into a purchase of something else that would satisfy and serve their personal vision better absolutely makes sense, rather than being held up and letting this property just sit and wallow and try to make it sound like it's something better than all the similar properties that are for sale on the market. That's being strategic. That's not saying, no, I really need to get that extra, every little ounce of juice out of that property. That doesn't make sense to me. Not if there's other things that you can do, because there's a time value of money component that you have to bake in the cake. And that's exactly where we wound up with the conversation. So in this particular case, I know I kind of went all over the place here a little bit, but getting them to recognize that the having the property sit and having the property not make as much money as it could from a cash flow perspective, and recognizing that they're not getting the return on equity that they could be, that really, in my mind, was a really good thought to taking their chips off the table, rather than creating a leasing job for themselves, rather than trying to hitch their wagon to a property manager that they know that they can't trust, or that they feel that they can't trust, because in that particular market, there's just not a lot of trustworthy property managers, or to try to change the use of it, going from a long-term rental to a mid-term rental or short-term rental, which again didn't make any sense. So taking the chips off the table to move it towards something around a personal vision does make a lot of sense. And they could take those chips off the table, sell the property, be done with it, eliminate the uncertainty, and then move that into a property that would still be an investment category, but then they could get to use from time to time down in Myrtle Beach, or down in St. Augustine, or down in Clearwater, or wherever it was that they wanted to buy properties. Like, that would make more sense. So that's why whenever I talk about this stuff, I talk about this, first and foremost, you have to be vision focused. And being vision focused, being personal vision focused, first and foremost, is why I created the Viper method. So when you look at it from that perspective, you can always say, well, hold on a second. Is this in alignment with my vision to create a leasing job for myself? Is this in alignment with my vision to create an Airbnb job for myself, or a, whatever opportunity you think is existing for yourself? And that's the first and foremost. And I keep going back to that personal vision thing for many people who come to me as entrepreneurs, because let's face it, entrepreneurs have never met a deal they don't love. Right. And that's very typical, is they never met an opportunity they didn't like. And every time they get in the shower, they have 5 more business ideas when they come out. And it was, they weren't the same 5 ones that they had yesterday and the day before that and the day before that. So this is why I think it's really, really important to get really clear about what you want that personal vision to look like. And that's what I help remind my friend of, is really and truly, what is it that you're trying to accomplish by doing all this stuff? So that was the interesting thing that I had. So if you are interested, I'm just going to go ahead and throw this up on the main screen here. If you're interested in joining the Time Wealthy Advantage room, this is on Facebook. There is a link in the description. You can join us there. Just head over to Facebook and you can join us. Just no jerks allowed. Don't be a jerk. This is a welcoming community, and just to kind of just spitball different ideas that we have. I do some different trainings and stuff. Or I will be doing some different trainings and stuff. Again, I haven't done them in a week or so just because last week was incredibly busy. I was at the Global Leadership Conference that featured John Maxwell and a bunch of other folks. It was what was his name? John, I'm going to forget his name, but there was another John, and John Aiken. I don't remember. He was hilarious. He was really, really funny. But he wrote the book, All You Need Is a Goal. John Acuff, that's it, John Acuff. Hilarious speaker. He did a really, really good job. And then I also mentioned that there was Tashonda, I'm going to forget her last name, but she was the CEO of TIAA Craft, and she was phenomenal. I really enjoyed her presentation. She was really great to listen to. So, but last week I was doing that, so I didn't do a lot of trainings. But if you are interested, I post some of that stuff in this group as well. But I also, if you are an Eventbrite person, you can go to Strategic Boardroom in Eventbrite and just look for any other stuff that I have coming up. I don't have anything posted there right now, but I will soon. If you are interested, and I don't have the slide here available, and I don't know what happened. All my stuff here kind of got all moved around. Anyway, if you are interested in purchasing a copy of the Time Wealthy Advantage, which is all, this is all the strategic stuff that I talk about in the Time Wealthy Advantage, there's a link in the show notes here. You can head there and get a copy of that. And for right now, for a limited time, I am offering a 45-minute strategy session specifically with me. It is not for anybody that works with me. It is specifically a 45-minute call with me directly, and that will last until it lasts. Okay. I'm starting to get kind of busy in my hours, and I have some other stuff that I'm getting ready to sign up for that's going to take up more of my time. But if you are interested in joining me on a call, and again, getting a signed copy of the Time Wealthy Advantage, you are more than welcome to do that. All right. That's all I have. Have a great rest of your day. We'll see you guys next time.